The woman who had put her name on half the skyline in downtown Toronto was standing at the edge of Platform 4 at Union Station, with absolutely nowhere she wanted to go. Daphne Marlowe had everything the world recognized as success. A corner office on Bay Street with floor-to-ceiling windows. A development portfolio that had reshaped 3 neighborhoods in the last decade. A name that opened doors before she even knocked. But for the past 19 months, since the February morning the hospital called and used words like impact and recovery team and finally "We're so sorry, Miss Marlowe," none of it had mattered the way people assumed it should. Her husband Joel had been dead for a year and 7 months. She still counted it in months. She didn't know when that would stop. The GO train platform stretched in both directions under the December cold. Rush hour had thinned. Holiday travelers lugged bags toward the escalators. Christmas music drifted down from the speakers above the main concourse. Something cheerful and relentless that she had heard 100 times and never once felt. She had come here tonight with no particular destination. Her therapist had suggested she try being somewhere other than her hotel room or her office. This was her compromise. Then, she heard it. Small footsteps, fast, desperate. A girl crashed straight into her. The child couldn't have been older than 9. Her hair was dark and tangled, her cheeks wet. From the cold, from crying, probably both. She wore a thin fleece jacket 2 sizes too large, the kind that comes from a donation bin, not a mother who knows your measurements. One boot had a broken zipper held shut with a strip of tape. Her eyes, when they found Daphne's, were wide with a very specific kind of fear. Not the fear of a child who had skinned her knee. The fear of a child who understood exactly what would happen if she was caught. Please. The girl grabbed Daphne's coat with both hands, her grip surprisingly strong. Say I'm your daughter, just for a minute, please. The whole platform seemed to hold its breath. 2 adults in gray staff uniforms were jogging down the corridor behind her, breath fogging in the cold air, faces tight with the particular impatience of people who considered this an inconvenience rather than a crisis. One of them pointed. Juniper, stop right there. The girl, Juniper, flinched so hard Daphne felt it through the fabric of her coat. Daphne Marlowe had spent 20 years making decisions in seconds. Acquisition bids, contract crises, negotiations that collapsed and had to be rebuilt in real time. She knew how to read a room before anyone else understood what was happening. She read this one. Without a single word, she pulled the girl against her side and turned to face the approaching staff members. There you are, she said, her voice carrying the easy authority of someone who had never once doubted her right to take up space. I told you to wait for me at the gate. The taller of the 2 slowed. Ma'am, that child is under our supervision. She left our vehicle without authorization. Daphne's arm stayed around Juniper's shoulders. I think there's been some confusion, she said. This is my daughter. The shorter one frowned. We have a photograph, we know exactly who she is. Do you? It wasn't a question. Daphne reached into her coat pocket and produced a business card, not because they would know her name, but because the embossed gold lettering and the Bay Street address said everything a business card was supposed to say. And I know exactly who I am. If you'd like to continue this conversation, I suggest we do it with your supervisor present and my solicitor on the phone. The 2 staff members exchanged a glance. Juniper's fingers twisted deeper into the lining of Daphne's coat. The taller one cleared his throat. There may have been a miscommunication. Yes, Daphne said, there may have been. They backed away, muttering something that dissolved into the noise of the concourse, and then they were gone. Daphne stood in the middle of Platform 4 with a shaking child pressed against her side, and absolutely no idea what she had just started. She didn't let go until Juniper's breathing slowed. Are they gone? The girl finally whispered. For now. Juniper pulled back just far enough to look up at her. She had the careful eyes of a child who had learned not to trust kindness too quickly. Not suspicion exactly. More like a door held almost shut, waiting to see if the person on the other side would push. Why did you do that? She asked. Daphne didn't have a clean answer. Because you looked like someone had been chasing you your whole life. Because Joel used to say that the only regret worth carrying is the one where you could have helped and didn't. Because I have been standing on this platform for 20 minutes, trying to feel like a person. And you are the first thing tonight that has made me feel like I actually am one. She said, none of that. Because you asked, she said. Juniper studied her for a moment longer. Then she looked over her shoulder toward the concourse, and her face changed. A shadow crossing it that had nothing to do with the people who had just been chasing her. I have to get to Oakville, she said. There's a train at 6:40. Why, Oakville? The girl swallowed. They're moving her tomorrow morning. If I don't get there tonight. Her voice broke off. She pressed her lips together the way children do when they are trying very hard not to cry in front of someone they just met. Daphne had sold her house in Oakville 6 weeks ago. She had signed the papers, handed over the keys, and told herself she was moving forward. She had not driven back once. "Tell me about your gran," she said. It came out in pieces, the way truth usually does when a child has been carrying it alone for too long. Her name was Agnes Leclerc, 74 years old. Oakville her whole life. After Juniper's parents were killed on the highway 3 years ago, a transport truck, black ice, the same senseless arithmetic the universe sometimes uses. Agnes had been the only family left. For 8 months they had lived together. Agnes cooked oatmeal with brown sugar every morning and kept a small flashlight under Juniper's pillow, because the girl was afraid of power outages. And on the days when grief arrived without warning, she would sit beside her granddaughter on the bed and say nothing at all, which was exactly the right thing. Then Agnes had a stroke. A small one. The doctors called it a minor event, which seemed like a cruel way to describe something that changed everything. She recovered her speech and her memory, but her balance was unreliable now, and she needed supervised care. The province had placed Juniper in a group home in Mississauga, while Agnes was transferred to Sunrise Gardens retirement residence in Oakville, 22 kilometers away. 22 kilometers might as well have been the moon for a 9-year-old, without a car. "They bring me to visit once a month," Juniper said. "If the scheduling works, sometimes it doesn't work." "And now they're moving her," Daphne said. "Up north, near Sudbury." Juniper picked at the edge of her sleeve. "They said the Oakville facility is being restructured. They said it's better care. But Gran called me last week when a staff member left the phone room unlocked, and she said she didn't choose this. She said nobody asked her." Her voice dropped to something very quiet. "She signed something because they told her it was routine. A transfer of care agreement. She thought she had to." Daphne went completely still. She said she asked what it meant and they said, "Don't worry, it's just paperwork." Juniper looked up. Gran is not someone who doesn't understand paperwork. She was a bookkeeper for 30 years. She knew something was wrong. But she was alone and no one else was asking questions. Daphne thought of every development contract she had ever seen worded to mean one thing on the surface, and something entirely different underneath. She thought of the people who signed those contracts, because they trusted the person holding the pen. "How far is Sudbury?" Juniper asked. 4 hours north, Daphne said quietly. The girl nodded like she already knew. "The visits will stop. They'll say it's too far, there's no transport budget. Gran will think I stopped coming. She already thinks I moved on. I haven't called in 2 weeks because they changed the phone schedule without telling me. She doesn't know why I went quiet." Her voice cracked on the last word. "She thinks I forgot her." The 6:40 train to Oakville smelled like damp wool and takeout coffee. Juniper sat across from Daphne with both hands wrapped around a hot chocolate from the station kiosk, watching Daphne scroll through her phone with the attention of someone storing everything for later. "Do you actually have a daughter?" Juniper asked. "No." "Do you want one?" It was the kind of question only children asked, not to hurt, but because they genuinely could not understand why anyone would hedge around the truth. "I did," Daphne said. "Joel and I tried for a long time, it didn't happen the way we hoped, and then we ran out of time." Juniper considered this with the gravity she seemed to bring to everything. "Gran talks to people who are gone," she said after a moment. "She says the dead don't stop listening, they just stop answering out loud." She looked out the window at the December street sliding past. "She talks to my mum sometimes. She says it helps." Daphne said nothing for a while. Then, "She sounds like a smart woman." "She's the smartest person I know," Juniper said simply. "And they're sending her away like she doesn't matter." Sunrise Gardens looked exactly like what it was. A facility built on good intentions and insufficient funding. The reception desk was cheerful in the way that cost very little. Laminated posters, a plastic Christmas tree, a sign that read "Residents First" in rounded letters designed by committee. The after-hours staff member who met them in the lobby was named Pauline, and she had the polished patience of someone trained to manage family distress without actually resolving it. "Visiting hours ended at 8, Pauline said. "And for care transitions, we really do need to coordinate through the child's placement worker." "Agnes Leclerc," Daphne said. "Room 14, is her transfer scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow?" "I'm not able to share resident information with." "With who?" Daphne kept her voice level. "This child has not been able to reach her grandmother for 2 weeks. 2 weeks without a call, without a visit, and tomorrow morning she is scheduled to be relocated 4 hours north to a facility she did not choose and may not have genuinely consented to. I am asking to see the consent documentation tonight." Pauline looked at the business card. Then at Juniper, who was standing very still with her hands folded in front of her like someone bracing for bad news. 30 minutes later, they were in a small meeting room with 3 pages of transfer documentation spread across the table. Daphne had built her career on reading documents that other people found too dense to parse. She read these 3 pages in 4 minutes. Then she read them. Again. The consent forms were genuine. Agnes Leclerc's signature was on every page. But the language had been constructed to obscure. The transfer was described as an enhanced care partnership. The name of the receiving facility appeared only in an appendix that was not included in the copy given to Agnes. The date of transfer was blank on her copy and filled in only on the administrative file, dated 3 days after she signed. Agnes had agreed to a transfer. She had not been told where she was going or when. She didn't know, Juniper said softly, reading Daphne's face. She knew something, Daphne said, not enough. She photographed every page. Then she called Bertram Aski, a healthcare law solicitor and former public advocate, whose number her property lawyer had given her in under 60 seconds. Because Bertram was exactly the kind of person lawyers kept in their contacts for exactly this kind of moment. Bertram listened without interrupting. The transfer is at 8, Daphne said. I'll be there at 7, he said. Get whatever else you can tonight. Pauline did not smile when informed a solicitor would be on site before the transfer team arrived. Agnes Leclerc was awake. She was sitting by the window in her housecoat and thick socks, a book open in her lap that she clearly hadn't been reading. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and very clear eyes, and when the door opened and she saw Juniper standing in the hallway, she went completely still. Then her face broke open entirely. "Oh, my love," she said. Juniper crossed the room so fast she nearly knocked the lamp off the side table. Agnes caught her, both arms wrapped around the girl, pressing her cheek into her granddaughter's hair, rocking her just slightly. The book slid to the floor. Neither of them noticed. Daphne stood in the doorway and understood, for the first time in 19 months, what it meant to witness something true. They told me she hadn't called because she was adjusting to a new program, Agnes said when she finally looked up. Her voice was steady. Her hands had tightened in Juniper's hair. I believed them. The phone schedule changed, Daphne said. She didn't know. Agnes studied her with the clear-eyed directness of someone who had long since stopped wasting time. Who are you? Someone who read your transfer documents tonight. A pause. And? You consented to a transfer. You didn't consent to Sudbury. The receiving facility isn't named on the copy they gave you. The transfer date was blank when you signed. The room was very quiet. Agnes looked at Juniper. I told you something was wrong. I know, Gran, Juniper said against her shoulder. I ran. Agnes held her tighter. Then she looked back at Daphne. Can you stop it? I'm going to try very hard, Daphne said. Agnes nodded once, the precise, unhesitating nod of a woman who had not handed her dignity away no matter what the paperwork said. Then I won't be packing tonight. What Bertram Aski uncovered over the following weeks was not a single act of carelessness. It was a system. Sunrise Gardens was one of 7 care facilities managed under a provincial contract with a private operator called Meridian Care Solutions. The company had been quietly consolidating its most medically stable residents, moving them to higher capacity facilities far from population centers, freeing up valuable land in Oakville, Burlington, and Mississauga for what the internal records described as residential redevelopment opportunities. The care facilities were a loss leader. The property beneath them was the asset. Elderly residents who couldn't easily advocate for themselves, families managed at a distance, consent paperwork designed to look routine. It was not careless, it was engineered. Daphne sat across from Bertram in a borrowed boardroom and looked at the spreadsheet he had built from the documents they had gathered. Transfer records, property assessments, corporate filings, and felt something she had not felt since before Joel died. Purpose, the specific clarifying weight of knowing exactly what needed to be done. She made 4 calls. One to an investigative journalist at the Toronto Star who recognized a real story within 30 seconds of hearing it. One to a provincial ombudsman's office contact with 12 years on healthcare oversight. One to a legal aid organization that represented seniors in care disputes. And one, the quietest, maid standing at the window looking out at the Oakville streetlights, to the chair of the Provincial Care Oversight Committee, a woman who had once told Daphne at a charity dinner, with the conviction of someone who genuinely meant it, that the mistreatment of elderly residents was a crisis no one wanted to name. I have documentation, Daphne said. 7 facilities, dozens of residents, a land scheme dressed as a care model. And I have a 9-year-old girl who ran through Union Station alone at night in December because she was the only one paying attention. The line was quiet for a moment. Send me everything, the chair said. By the time the story ran, Meridian Care Solutions had stopped answering media requests. 3 board members had quietly resigned. Agnes Leclerc's transfer was cancelled within 48 hours. Bertram filed formal complaints on behalf of 11 other families who came forward the week following publication. All of them using the same words in the same tired voice. We didn't know we had the right to say no. Juniper watched the news coverage from the couch in Daphne's hotel suite, wrapped in a blanket that probably cost more than anything she had owned in 3 years. She didn't look triumphant. She looked the way children look when something they have been carrying for a very long time has finally been set down. Not relief exactly, but the absence of bracing. "There are other kids," she said quietly, "whose grands got moved and nobody ran." "I know," Daphne said. "What happens to them?" Daphne sat down beside her. "That's the next thing to fix." She meant it. What became the Leclerc Foundation, named, at Juniper's insistence, for Agnes, began as a small advocacy office and grew into something that connected separated seniors and grandchildren through a dedicated visitation program, funded legal support for families navigating consent documents they didn't understand, and trained group home staff to recognize the particular grief of a child, cut off from the last person who remembered who they were before loss arrived. The formal adoption proceedings took 8 months, which was 7 months longer than Daphne would have chosen. There were home studies and hearings and a court review and a social worker named Terry, who had seen enough well-meaning people fail at this to be appropriately careful. Daphne answered every question. She came to every appointment. She did not once suggest that her income or her address should simplify the process, because she understood now that Juniper did not need someone who could afford to skip steps. She needed someone who would stay. Agnes sat in the front row of the courtroom the day the adoption order was signed. She had a new walker, blue, at Juniper's request, because blue was her favorite color, and she cried with her whole face, the way people cry when they have waited for something long enough to stop expecting it. Juniper held Daphne's hand through the whole proceeding, and when the judge's pen completed its work and she finally looked up, her expression was not the expression of a child who had gotten what she wanted. It was the expression of a child who had stopped waiting to be taken away. There are mornings now when Daphne makes oatmeal with brown sugar the way Agnes taught her, and Juniper sits at the kitchen table, with homework spread in front of her, working with the particular concentration of someone who has learned that ordinary Tuesday mornings are not something to take lightly. Agnes comes for Sunday dinners and stays through the evening, and sometimes after Juniper goes to bed the two of them sit on the back porch with tea and say very little, which is still exactly the right thing. Daphne no longer counts the months. She still talks to Joel sometimes, not out loud but in the way Agnes described, in the space between a thought and its next one. She thinks he would have loved Juniper. She thinks he would have said, with the warmth he always had for the obvious truth she was slowest to see, "You weren't lost. You were just waiting for someone who needed exactly what you had." She had stood on that platform with nowhere to go. And then a girl in a broken zippered boot had run straight into her, and asked for the simplest, most impossible thing. "Just say I'm yours, just for a minute." And Daphne had understood without yet having the words for it, that pretending was not what either of them needed. What they needed was the real thing. And you are never too far into your grief, or your silence, or your empty hotel room at the end of a long December, to find your way back to it.